Hello and welcome. This presentation is on my research targeting effective strategies for alcohol use disorder in the workplace. It focuses on why workplace drinking matters, what social psychology tells us about its causes, and which interventions are supported best by research. Alcohol use disorders, or AUDs, are a major but often underestimated organizational challenge. Paul Roman and Terry Bloom, which is the research article I used to start off this deep dive into alcoholism in the workplace, indicate that how workplaces play a major role in preventing and reducing alcohol-related problems. Consequently, I also believe, and some of the research that's in this presentation as well as in the actual final product, workplaces can also be a place where alcoholism or alcohol use disorders may start. And I'll demonstrate that and give you reasons why as we proceed through this presentation. The guiding question of the study is what organizational strategies are most effective in preventing and reducing alcohol use disorders among employees? And to answer this, the paper weaves together organizational research from over 2 decades of senior leadership HR experience, my own personal experience and coaching experience, as well as fundamental principles introduced in the Advanced Social Psychology, the State of the Science textbook. Various chapters there really bring to light some of the issues behind social influence, chapters on intergroup relationships, attitude change, social cognition. And then I've worked or pulled together information from about approximately 19 different research articles to weave together an understanding of the causes and the most effective strategies to mitigate. So employees take cues from peers and leaders, hence social groups and group dynamics play a big role in alcohol use disorder. Repeated exposure to alcohol-centered events, and the behaviors of colleagues reinforces norms through automatic social cognition. And this is discussed in Chapter 4 of Advanced Social Psychology by the author of that chapter is Fisk. The first major theme is the power of social norms and group dynamics. As Parentios and Gutierrez and colleagues in 2007 talked about in their study, when they showed that workgroup drinking norms strongly predicted individual drinking across 16 work sites or 137 different work groups. They indicated that employees take cues from their peers and influential team members. So group norms, social norms, group dynamics play a big role in predicting individual alcohol consumption because they support that argument that alcohol use is shaped less by individual preference and more by social context. The second theme is the stigma faced by non-drinkers. Research from Guman Park and Kim in the 2021 article introduced a model of perceived stigma toward non-drinkers in the workplace. And they demonstrated how abstainers may be viewed as antisocial or lacking commitment. The findings were central to this presentation's discussion of identity threat, psychological safety that comes up, and where the need to reduce that stigma as part of the effective preventive strategy. Abstainers from alcohol use are often perceived as antisocial or judgmental or not team players, and they can often be excluded from informal networking opportunities, or perhaps exclude themselves so that they don't feel the pressure to do something that they don't feel that they want to do. I think that this is super important because intergroup relations research shows that norm deviations can lead to marginalization, even if those deviations are good for you. These social identity processes explain why employees may adopt drinking behaviors just to maintain that sense of belonging. And this is covered in Brewer's chapter 11 on in-group relationships, when he talks about that in-groups often marginalize members who deviate from core norms, even when those norms that they expect them to participate in are not healthy. So social identity plays a big role here. Sim and colleagues in the 2014 research titled How Social Identity Shapes the Working Self concept found that when people feel a strong connection to a group, they were more likely to see that group's traits as part of who they are, especially if the group is important to them. So in workplaces where drinking is common, this can lead to employees taking on a drinker identity to fit in, while those who don't drink might quietly find themselves on the outside. And I personally have experienced this because I felt that there, over the many, many decades of working, that there was often this push to be social outside of work in these after work meetings or after work social events that turned into somewhat of an informal meeting, and not being there, you felt left out from the knowledge loop. So there's a two-sided sword here, in the fact that, participating might create this sense of having to join in to be part of the group. Not participating makes you feel like you're not part of the knowledge base, and you're marginalized because you're not being included, or you're being perceived as judgmental. Other ideas of why alcohol use disorders are prevalent in work, one of the most obvious ones is workload and stress. They're another key driver of alcohol use. The Workplace Interventions Preventing Risky Alcohol Use and Sick Leave Study, otherwise known as WIRIS, done by Thorson and colleagues in 2022, found that job strain, role ambiguity, and supervisor pressure was associated with higher employee alcohol consumption. And from a health psychology standpoint, this reflects Robles' account of stress and coping, in which high demands and low control, high demands, not being able to control those demands, promote maladapting coping strategies, which is discussed in Chapter 18 in the health chapter of the Advanced Social Psychology State of the Science textbook, written and edited by Finkle and Baumeister. So the study then moves into the four major categories of organizational interventions. The first of which is the Employee Assistance Programs, or EAPs, which are highly underutilized even outside of the AUD disorders. I've noticed from experience, and we'll talk to some of the studies that I've uncovered, that EAP programs, they're not communicated clearly, they're not campaigned well, they tend to be sort of like a crisis intervention rather than a preventative intervention, or an intervention in early stages. So Acela and colleagues in 2010 found that employees with at-risk drinking rarely use EAP programs until the problems become severe. And that mirrors Petty and colleagues' work on attitude and structure, which suggests that if employees don't see their drinking as a problem, that EAPs may receive a low participation and fail to change attitudes. And that's covered in the Attitude, Structure, and Change, Chapter 6 of the Advanced Social Psychology, the State of the Science textbook. The second intervention is workplace health and brief interventions. They're using screening, feedback mechanisms, and so forth. Richmond et al. Study in 2000 showed that a workplace brief intervention significantly reduced hazardous drinking more among women than men. They leveraged persuasion techniques from using personally relevant feedback to encourage more thoughtful processing and attitude change, which kind of links to what Petty was discussing in Chapter 6 of the Social Psychology textbook. Third, the leadership management training programs. I find, and I'll talk to empirical studies on this, from a personal perspective, this is a real opportunity, and often an underused opportunity, because leaders don't feel equipped. They may feel like they're walking on eggshells because alcohol use disorders and alcoholism could be protected activity as a disability, so they're kind of fearful of how to navigate conversations. They might feel judgmental. They may go from one extreme to the other. So Elling and colleagues 2022 found that training managers to recognize early signs of alcohol problems and to have supportive conversations increase their willingness to intervene. And that makes a lot of sense. If you don't feel you have the tools to have conversations that are going to be effective, you're not going to have those conversations. So this aligns with the identity-based leadership perspectives that are summarized in an article by Haslam and colleagues where effective leaders used shared identity and credible guidance rather than mere authority to influence the people that they were leading. The fourth is lifestyle and wellness programs, and I've personally seen this be super, super effective. And research will again support what I'm going to say next, which is that when you start to shift the cultural norms by creating, whether it's awareness or markers that you can say, target stress, physical activity, sleep monitoring, diet, anything that can help with emotional regulation. I even introduced and actually led yoga in the workplace. These can also help reduce the reliance on alcohol as a coping mechanism. And Kuthastan and colleagues in 2022 reported that participants in workplace healthy lifestyle programs also showed improved self-regulation, less engagement in unhealthy coping styles, and also less likely to have alcohol misuse. So peer-supported and social health initiatives are a promising area here. Ames and Bennett in 2011 in their research highlighted that peer-based interventions such as wellness challenges or buddy systems can reduce alcohol-related harms by harnessing the positive group influence. And this reflects Brewer and Hogg's emphasis on how group processes and social identity can be used to promote healthier norms rather than risky norms. So again, EAPs are underutilized until problems escalate, as Osella and her colleagues indicated in their 2010 research, but leadership training and wellness programs show strong and preventive effects. This is a multi-pronged approach. Interventions work best when they're multi-level and identity consistent, and they engage employees cognitively and socially. So across studies, several conclusions emerged. Standalone interventions like a written policy or an EAP on its own are not sufficient. However, when you pair them with what I previously discussed from, training and programs that are shifting, the thought process around health and wellness, cultures where alcohol is normalized might start to actually become less of a problem. Effective strategies require leadership engagement, consistent modeling, and, employees' perceptions of norms and authority, as described by research by Cialdini and Griskoviskius, that strongly shaped their choices. And that's also discussed in Chapter 7, Social Influence of the Advanced Social Psychology State of the Science textbook. So this paper argues that programs work best when they integrate wellness, identity, social norms, and then that echoes Fisk's emphasis on how schemas and attitudes and identity-based cognitions jointly guide behavior, discussed in the social cognition chapter 4 of the textbook. So again, it's a multi-framed structure: leadership, clear processes and policies, culture, a sense of inclusion, so if the non-drinkers don't feel like they're the outgroup, or when the non-drinkers don't feel like they're their outgroup, and wellness programs. They would address AUDs holistically. There are plenty of gaps here because this is not at all a one and done or a silver bullet approach. Future research should examine long-term culture change and objective organizational metrics. Many of these studies are not longitudinal studies. They don't take their practices as far out beyond 6 months or even a year. So there are important gaps that are identified in the research project. Excuse me. Ames and Bennett in 2011 note that most research is cross-sectional, so that limits our understanding of how interventions change behavior over time and how sticky it is. So future work should employ the longitudinal and multi-level designs, as I previously discussed, so that they can integrate social identity, measurements on stress, environmental cues, and keep that in line with the broader theoretical models that are summarized in Advanced Social Psychology, the State of the Science. And the study also needs to have, there's a need to study positive perceptions of non-drinkers. I think that is, our society is ripe for that now. that we have such a push for health and wellness, even outside the workplace, that becoming the poster person for health and wellness and a non-drinker can be incredibly influential and can help people see abstainers as responsible and health conscious, and less be seen as judgmental or an outgroup, and being part of a new norm. And finally, future research should include objective organizational outcomes, such as measuring absenteeism, safety incidents, turnovers, rather than relying solely on self-reported drinking. Because those are good markers to see how healthy an organization is. And I've always seen retention and presenteeism, being present and being engaged and fully committed, as two really important markers of whether an organization is doing its job as being a good corporate citizen and showing care and concern. So in summary, alcohol misuse is not just an individual issue. It applies social psychology, which allows organizations to build healthier, more inclusive workplaces. And alcohol use disorders in organizations are not the result of an individual's weakness. They're just shaped by social cognition, attitudes on social influence, intergroup dynamics, stress processes, all of the things that social psychology helps us explain. But the most promising path forward is a comprehensive, multi-level approach, as discussed, that combines clear policies, engaged and identity-aware leadership, stigma reduction, robust wellness and identity-based interventions, as discussed in most of the articles that were presented as part of the research project. When organizations intentionally apply these insights, they can reduce alcohol-related harm while building healthier and more inclusive workplaces, and hence be much more effective. Thank you for listening.